Hi, I'm Owen, and welcome to the premiere episode of The Pub Test. We are super excited to bring you this content, so no matter what platform you are watching on, do the usual so you make sure that you don't miss out on any of this great content. First case is going to consider Teresa Halbach. Now, she met an untimely death under tragic circumstances, I suppose is the best way we could describe it. There's two people currently serving time for her death, and that's Brendan Dassey and Steve Avery. We're not touching at all on the situation around Brendan Dassey. That's going to be a video all by itself sometime down the track. It hasn't made the list of ones that we're going to cover. A lot more research and information needs to go into that one, as there's some certain sensitivities around it, and we do want to be respectful. We will be diving into the case of Steve Avery, and there's some very controversial things that happened in this case. Happened well even before this case started. But whether you agree or disagree, and you can agree strongly or disagree strongly, that's fine. We just request that we keep our comments respectful, because whether or not we think justice has been served in this case, the true tragedy is that a young woman lost her life unnecessarily. And it's important to remember that Teresa Halbach has a family, and they are truly innocent victims in this entire situation. And so we just don't want to lose sight of that bigger picture. Now, why this case gets so much attention is because the main person involved, Steve Avery, was already fairly famous before this crime occurred. See, he'd 20 years previous had been charged for an assault and attempted murder, and he went to prison. And he was in prison for 18 years before the Innocence Project found the DNA evidence to prove, as he had been saying all along, I did not do this crime, and it was found to be right. And then just a mere 2 years later, he's charged with murder by the same police department that had falsely accused him, wrongly had him in prison, and now he's obviously suing them, and he was going to be facing a fair bit of money to come his way, some serious cha-ching. Now, only 2 years after being released, after spending those 18 years in prison, he's now charged with murder. Now, it's important to know why he got arrested for this assault and attempted murder. And that's because the victim was able to give a description to the police, and they drew a sketch, one of those sketches you see, and then they try and think, well, that's roughly what the person looks like. The reality is many people could possibly look like these sketches, and even in those moments, most reasonable people would not be 100% sure if the person has got their thinking right and whether they can really easily remember. Like, it's not a photograph. It's not like they got their camera out and click, and there you go. That's the person we're looking for. And the person doing the sketch, well, this is where it becomes a bit sketchy, pardon the pun, already knew Steve Avery. You might think, well, how? Well, just realise they just didn't grab him off the street and say, hey, we've got a rough sketch that looks something like you, but it could have looked like many people in that area. But Steve Avery already had some form in this regard. He was known to police. He'd spent 6 months in prison for robbing a bar. No, I don't think he spent time here, but he got convicted of animal cruelty to do with the family cat. And then he's also had a conviction of running his cousin off the road and then pointing a gun at her because he wasn't happy about some of the stories he believed she was spreading about him. Now, the issue with that was, and he got in big trouble for that, not just for endangering someone, but he actually had a gun. And because of his previous conviction for burglary, he wasn't allowed to have a weapon. So this all happened in a short amount of time. Like when Steve Avery went to prison, he wasn't an old person. Like he was still in what we would call the young and stupid phase of his life. And so when this accusation is made of a crime against someone that looked similar to Steve Avery, and no doubt the person drawing the sketch knew of Steve Avery when he's drawing the sketch, it wouldn't have taken much to say, you know what? We actually think this guy's done it. And they've gone and arrested him. But there was a problem. He actually had a rock-solid alibi. See, he had a docket from a place nowhere near Mantorwoc, timestamped to show that he wasn't there that day. He had 16 people, eyewitnesses, to say, no, he was not in that area. He possibly couldn't have done it. But we had the victim able to identify him. And as I say, like when you look at the sketch, it could have been many people in that area. But she was able to identify him. No doubt his past record did not help one bit. And on a side note, let this be a lesson, kids. Don't get on the police radar. Yeah, you can do some stupid things and so forth, but just keep it within reason. Because if something does go wrong, and you're already known to be doing something wrong, well, who are the police going to come and look at? Yeah, they're going to be coming looking at you. And that's unfortunately what happened in this case, no doubt. Like, they profiled him. Yep, he'd be the type of bloke to do this. So let's pick him up and let's nail him for it. We've got the eyewitness. We could easily discredit the little docket he's got and his eyewitnesses because they probably have something against the police too. So I could easily sell this to a jury that he was guilty. And as a writer, yeah, that'd be an easy thing to do, because you'd say, well, there's one piece of evidence, maybe two, that says that he couldn't have done it, but I've got a lot to show that he probably did. Yet, fortunately for Steve Avery in this case, the Innocence Project was out. Because when DNA started coming into existence and being utilised properly, well, a lot of injustices were able to be corrected. See, had they have had DNA back then, with his little cash docket and his friend saying he wasn't in the area, the DNA would have absolutely proved it. And so, fortunately for him in this case, well, he got released. You see, this is where it starts to get very, very muddied, because he's now released from prison. And, yes, Steve Avery is expecting it to start raining down money. In fact, I think it was around the $35 million mark, which was what was being asked for. Now, we know that he did not receive that money. That's spoiler alert. Should have said spoiler alert before I said that. He didn't see that money. That's because of what happened very shortly. But the waters get muddied because of some of the comments from the Mantorwoc Police Department. I believe it was the Deputy Sheriff, Eugene Cush. I don't know exactly how to pronounce that name, so I will now, from here on, I believe it was Deputy Sheriff. Call him Eugene. He's being, I think, deposed in the civil case. And he's asked the question, so Do you now accept the fact that it was not Steve Avery that committed this assault, but rather Greg Allen? And he says, no, I don't accept that. So he's like, well, don't you believe the DNA? He goes, I don't believe in what I see on TV. So what's TV got to do with it? It's DNA. You're in law enforcement. Like, surely you go where the evidence points. And the person says that, well, it's not TV, it's the DNA. And he says, well, where did it come from? And he's told, well, it's matched. And he goes, well, I know it matched, but where did the match come from? Like, where did it come from? You know, DNA can be planted. Wow. Like, I would like to be Eugene for a second. Like, just bear with me. I'm Eugene. I'm asked the question, do you now accept the fact that it was Greg Allen who performed that assault and attempted murder, not Steve Avery? Yes, sir. 100% we got it wrong. But we had good reason why we went down the path we did. Like, we knew Steve Avery. He had committed quite a few crimes already. And, like, the identification could have easily have matched him. And of all the people we could think of, it made sense that it could be him. Yeah, he had an alibi, but that was sketchy. That wasn't very good. And it didn't take that much work to put him in prison. And despite all his appeals over 18 years, he wasn't getting out because it still seemed like we had the right person. DNA has now proven that wrong, but I would just maybe point out to everyone that maybe we did the community a service. Considering his rap sheet in a small amount of time, who knows what other crimes he may have committed. Now, I'm not saying, I'm stopping the play acting here, I'm not saying that Steve Avery would have committed any more crimes during that time at all. I'm saying if lawyers are telling me throw as much shade as you can so that we can maybe shave some money off the payout that he's going to receive, that would be the way of doing it. Not denying that the DNA, is not reliable. So I do think he could have done a much, much better job in selling the fact that, look, they did their best and any reasonable person would have done the same thing. The comment about DNA being planted, as we know, would seriously come back to bite the Manawa County Sheriff's Department. So then when Teresa goes missing, and the last place she was seen was with Steve Avery at Avery Salvage, the police do come and ask, do you know where she could have gone? Do you know where she was headed after here? In which he didn't, which is fair. I said, look, do you mind if we have a look around? He says, sure. They go in, search his house, caravan, trailer, whatever it might have been. They don't find anything suspicious. And that's basically where it was. Now, Steve Avery is being interviewed and he gives all the right answers. Like, no, he doesn't know what happened to her. He let the police in. Nothing untoward. If the police didn't go and knock on his door and not have a search of the house, well, people would say they're pretty incompetent. Like, you would have to at least go ask the question. You're the last person to see her alive. And at the moment, though, she's just missing. But then a big search happens and they are searching the salvage yard. They find the car, her car that she drove out there in, and they go back to Steve Avery. And after a couple of searches, they find some DNA evidence. They didn't the first time. Now they do. So the comment of DNA can be planted, yeah, that doesn't look good anymore, does it? No, because we can actually, think, well, maybe that happened, because I don't think it was even the first 2 times they searched did they find DNA. But they did down the track. Now, considering many people would say they had 35 million reasons to try and pin this on him, because if he went to prison for murder, then they're not paying that out. So if we took this so far down to the pub, sitting down with a couple of beers with some mates, I think at the moment it's looking pretty strong that perhaps he was set up. Maybe he didn't do this at all. And now he's been in prison for a very long time, perhaps for a crime that he didn't commit. Well, that's one way of looking at it. But as always, with a good discussion, there is another side to the story that we have to consider before coming to any strong conclusions. Firstly, to discuss the other side of the equation. The idea that there was this great conspiracy to plant evidence because of the potential payout that Steve Avery was going to get, I find a little bit hard to accept. And I'll explain why. I live in a small rural town. We don't call them counties, but we call them shires. And there's a shire council. It's obviously different to the counties, but lots of people work for the shire in the town. Now, if the shire was getting sued by somebody for whatever reason, you would not be able to organise all those people to perform some massive conspiracy to hide all the evidence so that the council didn't have to pay out the money. Considering that they all have insurances, and I'm pretty sure counties would have insurances and so forth, but even if it had to come out of their pockets, it's not coming out of the workers' pockets. They're still getting paid by the county. And they're probably not thrilled with it because, yep, that money could be spent elsewhere, but it's not going to send the county broke. And from my experience, one person can probably keep a secret. 2 people start to struggle. But 3 people, you start getting a conspiracy. And once you get up to 3 people trying to do a conspiracy, you'll find out that they can't organise a chook raffle in a poultry. Because it will fall apart quickly. Because of all the different interests. Now, this case had so much attention and has been in the media for so long. If there was some great conspiracy, I believe it would have fallen over by now. I mean, people have written books on it who were involved with it and so forth. Someone could have easily cashed in and said, hey, I worked for them and guess what? I'm going to spill the beans. And to my knowledge, that has not happened. So I'm fairly sure there wasn't some great conspiracy trying to pin this on him just to save paying out some cash. I can understand some of the stupid comments that were coming out to minimize the payout, for sure. I mean, any lawyer worth their salt would be encouraging them to do that. And also, with all the documents that were going backwards and forwards when he first got released from prison, that happens in any big business when there's going to be some type of litigation. It's like you guys, you go through your emails, you check everything, make sure there is nothing out of line. If you said anything stupid a long time ago, try and maybe hide it. Not that you're doing a miscarriage of justice here, but anything written down can be taken out of context. So you just want to make sure all your ducks are in a row, and your lawyers would be telling you to do that. So there's a lot there that I just don't see as being some great conspiracy to try and pin him for a murder. And that sort of leads to the other part of this, which makes it difficult to accept there was a conspiracy. And that's the simple fact is that some poor person has actually died. Like, that's a tragedy. Are people suggesting that the police did that themselves to avoid a payout? Or that they just really wanted Steve Avery in prison? I don't know the area, I don't know the people, but I would find that extremely hard to accept. Are they saying that they took advantage of a situation that just fell into their lap? I just can't see how they could have or would have done this. Like, it's just beyond the stretch of imagination. I mean, as they say, like, truth is stranger than fiction, but if you were to write that in a fiction novel, that regular everyday police would plant evidence, as we're going to discuss, people would say just wouldn't happen. I mean, you probably could write that in a fiction story because obviously the whole police force, it's sort of like a Gotham City style thing where the supervillains control everyone and there's only one or two good people in the city. But that's not the reality, is it? So in that case, fiction is stranger than truth. Because the first bit of evidence that struck me when I heard the story was Steve Avery, did let the police into his place of dwelling so they could search it. That's fine. He didn't tell them something, though, which I really, really think should have been said. That after he saw Teresa Halbach drive away off the property, he had a rather large fire. A large fire that afternoon. Now, don't get me wrong. I've lived in rural areas for a fair time, and not everywhere has a garbage collection service on your curbside. And if you look where Avery Road is and everything where all this happened, it's a long way to the front gate. I don't think they probably have a garbage pickup. So you are going to burn your rubbish. But this happened to be a significant fire. Later on, they found some bones in that fire that DNA matched the victim. They had been tied up with some tie wire. You see what I've said before, that do you think that a police force would manage to get the bones, tie them up with tie wire, and plant them in someone's fire? It means that person's already been burned. Reasonableness would suggest that they were burned at that fire. That happened the afternoon she went missing. Another thing that apparently wasn't done, and if someone wants to correct me, I'm open to listen to it, but in the entire documentary, particularly during the search for Teresa Halbach, I don't recall any mention of Steve Avery being involved in the search. That, to me, is telling. Now, if he was, I will take these comments back. But if you've had business dealings with someone and they've gone missing and you were the last person to see them, would you not want to find them? Like, really be involved, help out? Like, people are searching your property too. Now, if you've had problems with the police before and They put you in prison falsely, and you're now suing them. Would you not want to be involved in the search to make sure that no one was doing anything untoward? Well, they did find the car on that property. There's suggestions that the car had been planted and so forth. But remembering it was 5 days later from when Teresa went missing to when the car was found, there was plenty of time for, like, anyone to plant the car. But where it was put was in a spot where it took a while to find. In fact, it was a person of the public who stumbled across it. The plates were gone, different plates were on it, and so forth, so someone had tried to obviously hide it. A suggestion that was made about the car, and I get it, while they got a car crusher there, wouldn't it make sense to, jam that through the crusher? But you don't operate a car crusher by yourself. I mean, if someone had gone down to the car crusher and started just randomly crushing cars, someone in the family, because they were all living on a property here, would have said, what on earth is going on down there? And I'm pretty sure even though you would have decimated the car, it would have been worked out fairly quickly whose car it was. So you would have had this crushed car, and that would have been an absolute dead giveaway that you did it. You went and crushed the car. But yeah, there is doubt about how the car got down there. So that's sort of a 50-50. As I said from the outset, we're not going to delve into DNA and all that, but I will just make one comment about it. Steve Avery was released because DNA proved that he couldn't have done it. Now, in prison, you don't have that much time to do much else other than look up things. So if you know that DNA is going to prove you innocent, you would also probably work out how it could prove you guilty. Remembering, he had 5 days to clean up. So when the police came and said, can we have a look around that first time, they weren't doing a DNA search. They weren't ripping the place apart. They were probably just looking for something obvious, like a purse or a set of car keys or something like that. And none of that was found. And they probably didn't dive in too hard, because at the time, she was just a missing person. So anything could have happened. You're not going to rip someone's place apart over a missing person. But he would have had the ability to be able to clean that place thoroughly, knowing the things you need to do to remove the DNA. Now, I know the profile of Steve Avery says he struggled at school, and so people assume, well, therefore you must be stupid. And that could not be further from the truth. The amount of people that are out there that maybe not had the best education, some can't even read, and yet they are some of the smartest people you can meet. They can pick up things real quick. They can make anything. They're not dumb. They mightn't have the skill set other people do, but it does not make them stupid. And when you look at Steve Avery, I think it's safe to say he's not a stupid person by any stretch of the imagination. And just finally, there's just one bit more of evidence I'd like to present before we ask that question. Has this story passed the pub test as regards whether or not the right person is in prison in this case? It is to do with that animal cruelty, being the family cat. I won't go into the detail. If you want to know, you can quickly Google search it. There's things on YouTube. There's things in Making a Murderer. You can go check that out yourself. I don't want to discuss it. But it's interesting to note that people who end up committing atrocious crimes start with animal cruelty. Now, I'm not saying it happens in absolutely every case, but it does seem to happen in a lot of cases where people move forward to committing greater crimes, start with those small ones. And I can't explain it. I don't know whether it's a breaking down of the conscience or whatever that could be. But it did happen in this case. Or at least he was convicted of animal cruelty. Now, to his credit, and credit where credit's due, he did say, look, at the time he was involved with the wrong crowd. He was trying to fix up his life, and then he ends up in prison for 18 years for a crime he didn't commit. And that was an injustice. But the fact that you could do things to an animal, I don't know, I'd leave that up to you. I'm not making the judgment call, but just making the comment that it does seem to be a pattern. So there you have it. That's the evidence pretty much that I'm going to present to do with the case. Now there's a lot more, but I think that's enough. Like, we have the police with good reason to try and want to pin something on him. Because that would save their face, absolutely, because they did imprison someone falsely. But if they could say, yeah, well, look, we sort of got it wrong there, but we actually got it right long term, yeah, like, you can understand there'd be motivation there. Planting of DNA, unfortunate comments there by Eugene. Could there have been a conspiracy? Well, of course there could have been. But on the other side, for me, I just can't see why anyone would bother just because of money as a payout. Like, it just would not make any difference to most people's lives involved there. And how you could take a situation of some poor person being murdered and then using that circumstance to try and frame someone. Like, the implication is that the police actually did the murder, which I can't personally accept. Or the fact they just know someone did it, but they're going to let them get away with it so they can pin this person. Also, I find really, really hard to accept. Not mentioning the fire on Steve Avery's part, to me, is rather telling. And the fact he had 5 days. 5 days to get this sorted out. So whilst evidence still was found, and if they do it forensically enough, I believe they could still find DNA. So that's probably why it took a couple of times. All in all, my feeling is, if I'm presenting this story down at the pub, I'm saying I actually think justice was done in Steve Avery's case. Yes, in this case, he was convicted, and rightly. That might not be your opinion. So as I've said, if you don't agree with my opinion, or if you do agree with my opinion, leave some comments, but keep them respectful. Because as we must still recognise is that a tragedy did occur here one way or another, whether justice has been served or justice not served. And that is that a poor young lady has lost her life. And that means a family are dealing with something they should never have had to have dealt with. So keep that in mind in your comments. But that brings this particular episode to a conclusion. So if you have some even comments about how you'd like the content to improve, or cases you want discussed and so forth, then send us a message about that too. We are planning to release a new case every week. And so keep on the lookout for the next one. It is been in the media again just recently. And I find this one really fascinating. When it was really just starting to happen, I was following a lot to do with this next case that we're going to discuss. So thanks for watching. Do all the usuals, whichever platform you're on. If it's follow, if it's like, if it's subscribe, if it's hit notifications, do all of that. It does help us out. Comment as well. That's also useful. But just make sure you don't miss the next episode. So we'll see you next time. This is Owen out, and you've been watching The Pub Test.